They bring you out there and they drive you around in Sprinter vans. And then they buy you a steak.
There's a lot that goes into the franchise thing on the market selection, and the operator both have an equal amount of responsibility in the success of this thing. But I do believe a really good operator, even in a less than ideal market, can still do really well.
Everybody's painting a picture of the best case scenario. And I think this is a thinking mistake for a lot of business people in general is it's too fun to play in your spreadsheet and be like, oh, but what if we open up with this many clients? Oh, wait, what if our average revenue per client is this? And they don't spend enough time thinking about like, what is the absolute worst case scenario if everything goes horrible?
Hello and welcome to Gym World Worldwide. I am your host, John Franklin, joined with my fitness friends, Mark Fisher and Stu Brower. Today, we are bringing you a special episode on Xponential Fitness, a company that many of you gym owners probably haven't heard of, but should know about. And the reason I want to do this episode is we've been doing a lot of franchise positive content on the show. We've been talking about how becoming a franchisee is a good option for some gym owners, how becoming a franchisee is a unique path to wealth if you want to go multi-location. But the reality is that becoming a franchisee is a really fast way to bankrupt yourself if you do it the wrong way. And so what spurred this article is Mr. Stu Brower here on his channel, WTF Gym Talk, made a video about this Bloomberg article talking about how the biggest boutique fitness company turned suburban moms into bankrupt franchisees. It took off. And Mark and I have talked about Xponential on the show quite a few times. And Mark is actually a franchisee himself, a newly minted one. So I thought it would be an interesting idea to get different perspectives on franchising from an actual franchisee and a room of fitness experts. So Stu, maybe give everybody a rundown on what Xponential is and basically the TLDR of this article.
So Xponential is globally the largest holdings company of boutique fitness franchises. They have 10 brands. They just added an 11th, which is a weight loss clinic, but they have this, they've all these other brands underneath there. Every genre and niche of boutique fitness you can find. You have row house, rowing. You have cycle bar, spinning. You have BFT, which is like a more operational capacity friendly CrossFit. You have Rumble, which is boxing, so on and so forth. You've got AKT, which is dancing, and they've got a genre for everything. And essentially, out of the 3,000 or so franchises, there is and I'm going to call it the loud minority. There's a loud minority, but it's what they're being loud about is what's shitty. But there's a loud minority, let's say 30 to 60 to 8, I don't care if it's 100, that have gripes with Xponential because they were either lied to, there was deceitful practices as to what you could do with that franchise. And this Bloomberg article by Natalie Wong came out, and she did an incredible fucking job. And she pretty much highlighted the ugly side of this select group of franchisees who were misled or straight lied to or whatever it was. And they opened up, there's these facilities, these studios, these franchises, and most of them went bankrupt, and it didn't end up well for them. What happened to them is it's not what they were pitched on Discovery Day when they probably went on site to Xponential in California and were pitched by the leadership group there. So that was pretty much the article. I've got like this, this two viewpoints on this. Number one, I think if you really start looking at it, if you read the article, and I literally read the article word for word on the podcast and went through it. But even as I go back and look at it, I truly believe, and take this as you will, a lot of the people who failed were women. And I'm going to put this as blatantly as I can. Their fucking husbands make a ton of money and they wanted to give their wife fucking something to do. So they bought them a goddamn cycle bar franchise because you love cycle bar so much. Let's open one up down the street, honey. And that way you can stop bugging me. That is truly the number one avatar customer for an Xponential. A woman who had a life-changing experience inside of that studio, and then they have, the husband is a pediatric open heart surgeon for midget babies. He makes crazy money, and that's what it is. Honey, here you go. Here's a project for you. You don't have to be a stay-at-home mom. You can own a cycle bar. And guess what? That lady was fucking destined to fail no matter what she did, because she doesn't have a fucking clue what she's doing. And it's not turnkey. It's still a business like anything else. There's just a playbook that had saved the average gym owner, 5 years worth of, can I figure it out? No, not this way. Let me try this. So I don't know if I blame the franchise system. I do blame a lot of the lying, the deceitful, and the unethical things they did to attract people and fudging the numbers. But at the end of the day, I'm also very much putting an ode of blame and responsibility on the franchisee to do your fucking due diligence and look into this before you sign a contract.
Yeah, so I think Natalie cited this report in the actual article itself, but before that article came out, there was a short report by a Twitter short seller called Fuzzy Panda Research.
Yeah.
And the backbone of the report was basically like Geisler, who's the CEO of Xponential, he was the CEO of Pump and Dump, like literally like a Bangkok boiler room that was like shilling stocks, basically that they had like at the time. So I think it's important to note that they IPO'd like during the frothy market mania of like 2020, 2021, like same time when F45 IPO'd. And so this was like a hot time for fitness concepts. And valuations in franchise land are based off of units. So units sold and unit growth. Like I think that mattered a lot more than EBITDA. And so the article says Xponential is doing a lot of stuff to make the brand look better than it was. So one of them was like they were claiming they've never closed a store, but they found 30 permanently closed stores. They found a bunch of people sold their studios back to Xponential for $1. So Xponential was like they owned a bunch of the franchisees that they had bought back to say they had never closed a store. The year-over-year unit, like the FDDs they'd remove studios or cherry pick data to make it look more positive than it was. So if you looked at some of the disclosures from Xponential, it made the studio level and the actual like franchise level look better than it was in reality. Mark, you've read some FDDs now as a franchisee. Maybe explain what that process is like becoming a franchisee.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, reading this article, and I'll happy to give you like all my thoughts on it. But to start with that specifically, yeah, the process of becoming a franchisee, that was one of the things that I found strangest about this article, which I thought was overall pretty good. And listen, I think there's a lot of criticisms one can and probably should make of Xponential. I did find some of it, this sort of cliche journalistic hit piece on business where it's like, they bring you out there and they drive you around in Sprinter vans and then they buy you a steak. It's like, well, yeah, like that's kind of the way this is. Like that's actually not that, I don't think that much of an issue. I think the bigger issue, of course, is if the FDDs are not accurate, because franchises can be very scurrilous. They are highly, highly regulated in the United States because there's a lot of sketchy things that have gone on historically. So in theory, the FDD should be really trustworthy data. And this is something I'm curious, because I haven't really heard much more about this. I don't know if you have either, John. We texted back and forth when the Fuzzy Panda report came out, but they're really cooking the books. I mean, that's like, I think, serious SEC stuff. I think in the Bloomberg article, the SEC, I think they allude, if I remember correctly, the SEC said that it had maybe started to look into things, and Xponential was like, well, that's news to us. We don't know anything about it. But if you're lying about the FDD, that is a big deal. I mean, it's one thing to fudge the truth. And no doubt it seems one, I think, accurate assessment of the situation is they're just all sales all day, every day. And they want to go as far as they can. And depending on your perspective, like over the line of lying, or if you're being charitable, like right up to right underneath the line of lying. The most obvious example being saying that we have never closed a location, but in practice, the company bought them back for $1. It's super, super weird. I understand why from marketing and sales perspective, they would do that. But clearly that for me is like, okay, well, now we're like kind of lying to say that. But if we get into a situation where truly they're removing underperformed units from the FDD, that is a big deal. They're going to be real legal hot water. And not only that, but yeah, for the franchisee, if you're trying to make these decisions, that's part of how you do this. Now, admittedly, having again gone through the process, if you're vetting franchises, hopefully you're not just looking at the FDD, right? Because by definition, even with the highest of integrity franchise, they're always going to be, I don't want to say fudging things, because again, I'm not suggesting by any means everyone's over the line of lying, but everybody who's in sales always is using a little bit of hyperbole. It's just kind of the deal, right? You want to position yourself in a favorable light, but if the FDD is not accurate, that's like super, super shitty. And again, in a perfect world, when you're vetting this, you try to get on the phone with franchisees. And if you, as I did, work with a very good franchise consultant, they will take you through a very well baked out process of, you can look in the FDD because they do have to publish. And again, now if their FDD is not reliable, this might be totally a house of cards, but they're supposed to publish a list
Mark,
of.
sorry to interrupt you, but what for people who aren't familiar, explain what an FDD is.
Thank you so much.
I don't think we gave them that context.
Yeah, thank you. FDD is an acronym, stands for Franchise Disclosure Document, I think. And essentially, it is a bunch of information about the franchise and about its historical performance that has to be shared with people that are considering becoming a franchisee. And this is because historically, a lot of people really got hosed by franchises. It's very, very tightly regulated, and there's a lot of information that needs to be in there, including but not limited to everybody on the leadership team. Do they have any history of any legal action against them for anything? What is the most it costs and the least it costs to open up a franchise in other markets? What is the mean performance? What is the median performance? How are the best stores in the system doing? How are the worst stores in the system doing? And as I was getting to there in my previous comment, it's supposed to include a list of all the people who've closed units and their contact information. So in fact, you can actually reach out to these individuals, whether they'll talk to you or not, that's obviously a different thing. But in theory, you should look for people that are not happy with the franchise system to understand the limitations. Because of course, any system, like any model, is not going to be perfect. There's going to be things about it that are inherent challenges of running that particular play. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's a little bit of context from how this would impact somebody looking to invest in a franchise, and why some of these allegations, if they're true, are a real big deal and could potentially land with people in jail.
So, Stu, you interview a lot of franchisors on your show, as well as a lot of franchisees. Maybe before we go into how choosing the wrong concept can be a surefire recipe for gym bankruptcy or personal bankruptcy, let's talk about how this works. And Mark, maybe you can chime in as well. Like, if you are a franchisee, what is the benefit if you want to, like, let's say I want to open 10 gyms? What is the benefit of going the franchise route rather than just saying I want to come up with my own concept and open 10 of these?
Well, I mean, as everyone here knows, Mark being the most prolific success of this on this show right here in the industry, and one of the best examples in the industry, coming up with your own concept is incredibly hard. If the failure rate for a small business is 50% at year whatever, 1, 2, the failure rate of coming up with your own concept in any industry, like brand new, it's a new UBF, unique belief in fitness, or you're going after a unique market, or it's a different way of doing it, incredibly hard because there's no POC, there's no proof of concept. So you're flying the plane as you build it. And that leads to a long delay in achieving the financial success that you ultimately could, i.e. a Mark Fisher Fitness, i.e. a CrossFit concept, whatever it may be, metabolic. But if I want to open up, if my goal is like, hey, I want to be an owner operator of 10 units, well, let me save myself 5 to 7 years. And I identify a brand that I truly enjoy. And that's the thing is, I think a lot of people think of franchise as like, oh, it's a co-op. And Orange Theory really did this. A lot of the Orange Theories that opened up in second generation after they'd done 38 of them in Florida or whatever it was. By the way, like, she opened up all those locations in Florida, franchised them all in a certain market. But then when it opened up, you saw a lot of co-ops. And a co-op would be 2 or 3 doctors get together. They've got a bunch of cash sitting there. And they go and invest. They all throw in $150,000 or whatever the number is, into a system, and they never step in. They're not gym people. They don't care. They might like the workout, but they saw it as a financial opportunity, like they would invest in a stock. This is just a different thing. really in the small business thing, like let's look at like Alloy with like what Mark's invested in as a franchisee, the Metabolics, the Xponentials. These are just one-off. Generally, people getting one unit, not multi-units at once, right? You'll hear someone like, oh, a 50-unit deal was signed for Sweat House in Boston, right? That was something that got released with Jamie Weeks and those guys. But that's one guy who bought the rights to 50 or whatever locations in an entire market. That's not what typical franchising is. Typical franchise is one-unit deals, generally a owner-operator who's going to be somewhat involved in the business to a high technical degree, coaching the classes, or a very, low technical degree, high operational management degree. I'm overseeing, I'm hiring a GM, the whole deal. But yeah, if I was looking to open multiple of these, I would first identify one that I really, really, really like. I believe in the UBF. I like the founder. And I think there's an opportunity here for me to do this. And I've just saved myself 5 years of headaches. There are people who want to create. I want to build it with my own hands and take the clay from the ground and turn it into a thing. And that's fine. Just also accept the odds of you actually making something that is going to be viably scalable. Like if you want multiple things, slim and beyond none is the actual statistical odds of that happening. So some people pay money to skip to the front of the line. Like, oh no, this thing, Alloy, this looks great. Oh my God, I love this. And Rick Mayo, I've looked up for him in the industry for years. I align with his core values. I sat in on the discovery day. I've been inside the studio. I've spoken to 9 other franchisees who have been with him. Some that have been with him a year, some that have been with him for 3 years. I feel like I've got a good feel of the landscape. I'm going to go ahead and move forward with this. Versus what I feel some people get into, it's like, oh, I hear if I buy one of these, it's like an ATM machine. It's fitness, right? It runs itself. You've seen the cool color lights they have. Fuck, this can be great. And that's not the case.
So, Mark, you have an interesting perspective because you have an incredibly successful single location gym built around you. Mark Fisher Fitness is the name of the gym.
I am the dancing monkey, head dancing monkey.
Yes. And you opened a second one for a minute, and then now you are opening Alloys. So there's obviously a reason for that. Why'd you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was a few things. And first of all, I'll say one thing that is important. I think understand context for this is, we were discussing before this, I've recently taken another step back from MFF, and I'm not even on the org chart anymore. They'll still obviously be like very involved, and I'm very emotionally invested in making sure that business is well and people are taken care of. And, MFF, I think we will likely do some more locations at some point. And I think the whole industry, and I know this is a long time listeners will see a common thread here. The whole industry, a lot of people are congealing around this like smaller footprint, small group, leaner model. And for me, as much as I obviously love MFF, I'm not going to open up MFF anywhere else. And I'm interested in the things I will learn because I'm maybe most driven by growth by operating in different markets. To me, I found that very, very interesting. As it happens, MFF, again, is not going to be a great fit for even like a suburban market in New York City. And it, like many people that built a beautiful, massive ocean liner, behemoth, multi-million-dollar gym, I think anybody that owns that kind of gym will tell you generally, yep, can't do that again. That's kind of unscalable. That doesn't exactly work. You can't really copy and paste that. So for me, I'm buying speed, right? I think that's part of what you're alluding to is because a franchise, frankly, is like a lot of money, right? If you consider franchising even comparable to licensing or even hiring a business coach to work on your own independent brand, you pay a lot more money with franchising, but in theory, you're also getting a lot more support. It's also it's done for you in theory, though, again, how much that is going to depend on the system. I think the other real advantage of a franchise that is already been very valuable for us that I don't think is easy to understand on the outside is consider, I imagine many listeners are involved with some kind of coaching program or mentorship. It is very valuable to share ideas and brainstorming, not just with your coach, whoever's running the program, but with other people that have similar models to what you do. But of course, there's going to be some constraints on how valuable that will be because you're different markets. This guy's offering, 6-on-1, you do like a 5-on-1, they do templates, you do whatever. Part of the advantage of a good franchise system is everyone is running the same play. Now, again, there's going to be market variation, no doubt, right? So you might have different pricing models, you might do some different things in the business, but it is incredibly easy for franchisees to compare the apples to apples and oranges to oranges of the respective businesses. And that is another thing I was interested in. And I guess I'll kind of pull up there. I just, for me, it just felt like this was an opportunity I was going to learn a whole lot. And again, I got to concede, I know Greg has been a guest on the show before. Like that was part of it too. I was leveraging an opportunity that was there. I think if I didn't have someone that I trusted that was able to be the boots on the ground operator, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it realistically. I might have tried, unfortunately, for all the other business endeavors I'm doing, and unfortunately for my wife and my baby. But in practice, I had somebody that I trusted was able to do this stuff because I don't have an unlimited time per week that I can do it. So for me, that was part of the equation too, which I think is a good thing. If anybody's listening to this, I'm really excited about what's happening in the industry generally. I think there's a lot more discussion around, okay, how do we really have some real empire fitness adventures? And I love all of that. And I would just encourage you to be cautious that when you chase three rabbits, oftentimes they're all going to get away, right? And I say this is a guy that knows that I always struggle with that and recently making some moves to, narrow my own focus.
Two of the things that I think were touched on, but we could go a little deeper on that I think are a benefit if you go the franchise route versus the independent is one is access to financing. So both Stu and I have talked to Angelo from Live Oak Bank before, based on some of my conversations with him. Getting SBA money is a lot of times easier within a franchise concept versus an independent one. Especially they can go off of like the FDD documents. And if they work with other franchises in the chain, it gives you a lot more clout. A lot of time franchises will have preferred lenders who understand the concept and will lend to you easier. And then the big one is private equity loves franchises. Well, they love good franchises. Yeah. Private equity loves recurring revenue. And so a good fitness franchise is just juicy recurring revenue with like a predictable brand. So there's a very clear exit strategy if you are a franchisee within a good system. So if you can build from one unit, which is what Stu's saying, like if you're early onto a concept, you're going to buy one unit, maybe two units. But if you can grow that into 10, 15, in a concept that has a good tailwind, so it continues to grow, and you get the EBITDA over $1 million, all of a sudden you're interesting to more institutional money than just some guy like what he's saying, a doctor who wants to buy himself a job. And private equity pays a lot better than a doctor who wants to buy a job. So if you want to make like real money, I think going the franchisee route, building to a point where the EBITDA is large enough to be interesting to private equity is one of the best ways to get really rich doing fitness. I think step one would be start your own concept, buy a building, and that's a proven model that comes up over and over and over again here. But if we look at people who have 8-figure plus exits doing brick and mortar, they either own a franchise that they then sell to an Xponential, right? So somebody who creates their own brand, scales it to that number of concepts and sells it to someone who is then going to go franchise it. They franchise themselves, or they are early to a hot concept and they become a large franchisee and they sell multiple times to private equity.
So this is, I think, obviously someone's hot take. I was hanging out last night with two friends here in the city that are both pretty sophisticated players and operators. And one of the things they were discussing is in their casual conversations with even venture capital funds here in New York City, there's a real push right now towards atoms and away from bits, because it seems tech stuff is getting it's such at the edge, and essentially like Google and Microsoft are just going to like buy everything. And by the way, John, congratulations on your big exit to Google in 2 to 3 years, because basically tech, it's so hard to get in now and get a really good return. And the way that people are valuing those businesses also changed. So what's interesting, and again, this is highly anecdotal, this is just one person's perspective, but it feels not wrong. A lot of not just private equity, even venture capital now are looking at atoms. Like they're looking and investing in these brick and mortar, non-sexy businesses that have no chance of getting replaced by AI, because they think, at least for the next few years, that's likely where a lot of the return is going to be. Now, again, that's one person's hot take. I'm not sure I 100% am advocating that, okay, this is definitely inarguably true. And furthermore, this might not be relevant if you're like me, not planning an exit in the next couple of years. But I think it is an interesting moment in this next little bit. If you happen to if you can grow something pretty quickly, if you're looking to get out in a few years, this might be an interesting time where you're going to get even extra attention and love from the type of private equity and even probably not venture capital, but certainly by private equity places now that are, I wouldn't say burnt out on tech, right? Tech is obviously still a very like lucrative thing, but it just does seem there's a lot more interest in this brick and mortar type of business than there was maybe 3 to 5 years ago.
So let's say I'm a gym owner, I'm listening. I want to go the franchise route. You've sold me. I want to build 10 units, sell to private equity. I think all of us, based off of conversations we've had privately, like there were some red flags at Xponential. I don't think any of us would have went in, even if we were into the concept, I don't think any of us would have went and bought an Xponential franchise, even if we were given it.
I'd buy a stretch house tomorrow, or sorry, stretch lab tomorrow.
Stretch labs seem pretty good, yeah.
In a 10 unit portfolio, are we really thinking all 10 are going to be good? No. Like it just,
no.
Here's one thing I want to say. If you've never ridden a motorcycle, or a moped, or gone really fast on a mountain bike, you have no business getting on a motorcycle. So when a franchisee steps into this, one of the biggest things, if I'm Xponential, and I think this is on them, it's like, who are we handing this franchise system to? We handed a motorcycle to someone who's gone mildly fast on a moped before. And guess what happens? The franchise system this is the trajectory. And my buddy, I'm stealing this from Brandon Cullen, the co-founder of Metabolic. The franchise system hands you the trajectory. Motherfucker, you still have to fly the plane as the franchisee. That's on you. And there's certain things too. I want to go back to the FDD docs, something I had a long conversation with Brandon Cullen at Metabolic on this. Item 7, if everyone Googles item 7 FDD docs, that's the part of the FDDs. And I've gotten to look at lots of FDDs in working with some people that lays out all of your expected expenses. Now, if a franchise, for example, has been working in tier 3 and tier 2 markets, and their expected cost per square foot is $65 in construction per square foot. And then you're like, I'm going to bring this shit to fucking Denver, Austin, Charlotte, Nashville, a primo tier 2 market. And then you get into like, wait a minute. Every quote I'm getting for construction is $125 a square foot. You lied to me. No, you just fucked up my bell curve is what you just did, right? Like you have to, again, there's some onus on someone needing to have some level of business acumen or hire a consultant, someone who's been there, done that, to look at this and be like, okay, these are the franchise disclosure docs, but you still have to look at them with a critical eye. And I feel like anyone who thinks like, I'm just going to get on this motorcycle and it's going to be super easy. It's going to balance itself. I'm not going to have to worry about anything. You're going to eat shit. And I think that's really the tale of like those cautionary tales that came from the Natalie Wong article in Bloomberg.
And if you want to hear from someone in the trenches, you can go listen to Mark's partner's episode on this show. Greg, I think it was 2 episodes ago. He's currently in the thick of it, and
he's in the thick of it.
You can hear his tears. In between the talk.
Yes, and I think I think to our credit, went in pretty eyes open what was going to happen. I think to some extent we had some of like the worst things that are going to happen, like are the worst case scenario played out. But I think that's the distinction between us and what could have happened with some of these people is we went in prepared for the absolute worst case scenarios. And I think part of the issue with a lot of franchisees and the franchisors often don't help is everybody's painting a picture of the best case scenario. And I think this is a thinking mistake for a lot of business people in general is it's too fun to play in your spreadsheet and be like, oh, but what if we open up with this many clients? Oh, wait, what if our average revenue per client is this? And they don't spend enough time thinking about like, what is the absolute worst case scenario if everything goes horrible? Because even the item 7, it's a great point, Stu, not only, and that very much was the case with Alloy, but we knew that. We knew we were in a different market. It was going to be more expensive. You also have to have enough sophistication to understand that, depending on when you look at the FDD, there was also a very weird moment where we went in where we knew the numbers were wildly off, not only because it was a different market, but because of inflation, because of this epic inflationary environment that was not yet reflected in the FDD. And we knew what it was going to cost. And it wound up actually coming, I'm proud to say, a little bit under our preparation for like a worst case scenario. But that to me is, I think, the missing piece. I think I would definitely, I might gently push back against your claims, Stu, that these are all just like rich doctors wise. Like I'm sure some of them are. And I think there's also a lot of people that, maybe no less problematic, just came in with stars in their eyes, optimistic people, the franchise sort of showing them, here's the best case scenario. Here's what, I can't really tell you. And that's like their move off. They're like, well, I can't legally say how incredible our franchisees are doing or how unbelievably well they're getting. I can't say that, but let's just say some people are doing really, 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 really good. And you're like, well, because you got to build in your margin, right? And I think that's like business 101. You always have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, emotionally, time capacity wise, financially, because that's the other piece of this. Like the first rule is just don't die, just don't run out of cash. Just like with independent brick and mortars, people come in undercapitalized, and that's part of how they get out to sea. Because, like you said, Stu, you have 10 units, you're going to have 2 dogs. If you have 10 units, you're going to have 2 dogs. And guess what? Your first unit might be a dog. Might do just okay, right? Or even worse, sometimes your first unit, you get the star, which is going to happen 20% of the time, and you think you're a genius because you just happen to luck in the right location, and now you're going back to your pro forma being like, we're going to be billionaires, right? Because if you have 5 locations, 3 are going to be okay, 1 is going to be a dog, and 1 is going to be an idiot could run and have it be successful.
And going to the mom thing, that was me more or less poking fun. Natalie Wong's title of the article was Xponential Bankrupted Suburban Moms. I'm like, what the fuck is a suburban mom doing opening up a business? Like, where's the context there of giving the kid a loaded gun?
Yeah, and it's very much like I like coffee. I want to open up a coffee shop. And it's like, no, you don't. It's like, I love cocktail bars. I love cocktails. Not a business I want to get into, And I'll say I'm not known for my restraint on that. When I did look into that, I did manage to not open up a cocktail bar during the pandemic.
I see how it happens though. Like as someone, Mark, you have a young daughter. I have 2 young kids. My wife and I go back and forth. My wife's actually quitting her job to go full-time momming this year. And if you're working for, you give up a job you like to raise a family, 18 years later, you're empty nest or kids are in high school and less reliant on you. If you want to go back into the workforce, but you've become accustomed to like an upper middle class or upper class lifestyle in the case of Stu's doctors, or you're not going to go back and bag groceries at Publix, right? Like you're not going to get a $20 an hour job because you've been out of the workforce for 18 years. So that's why, it's real estate, or in this case, franchises, or, it's something where you can have a little more autonomy, freedom, upside. And so it's easy to see how this would happen, and it's easy to see how this would be a very good target. If I was a franchisor, that would probably be the niche I would target. The same way a lot of the studios we have on here target this niche. It's just like, it's a great niche. It's, a lot of access to disposable income.
Totally. And there's a lot that is attractive about running a business, and a lot of people don't have the idea, right? The model does make a lot of sense and can be really valuable, right? There's maybe a conversation to be had about, our societal obsession of late with the sexiness of entrepreneurship, but it is a way to get in without having your own idea. And unfortunately, just sometimes there's just a violent combo between somebody coming in without their eyes open that just happens to be an overly optimistic person that just doesn't do the math of the worst case, combined with a franchise salesperson that is not incentivized to really make them think through the worst case scenario. So, you want everybody to do good, but it's a bummer when it doesn't. And I think, hot take, too long didn't read is probably like, there's probably some blame to go around for everybody. But one other thing about the article too, I have to say, they're like, these people, they encourage you to fund it with your 401k. And listen, overall, I generally prefer to grow money with other people's money and debt, particularly if interest rates are not crazed. But again, they kept making it sound like that's this like horrible thing. Like I know people that have done that, and that was an amazing return on their investment, right? Because going into a franchise, that's part of the game too. And that certainly was part of my calculus why I did it. The financial calculus for me was, I'm happy to work a little bit harder because I think I'm going to get better upside betting on myself, particularly if I can leverage myself and my capacity through someone else operating. I think overall, I'm going to get a better return than some of the more passive stuff, which I also do plenty of. So I can understand why people get into it. And I want everyone to succeed, but some people don't have the chops.
What Mark's referencing is you can legally tap into your retirement accounts to buy a business. So if you're going to go buy a franchise, you got a stacked retirement account. You can go in there and, there's no tax implications of doing that, I believe, if it's above a certain threshold, right? You have to have like over 100K in there or something like that.
I think so. And then basically you keep all the stuff in there. So there also are some tax advantages because I think if I'm understanding correctly, and Stu, you might know this, I think this can be a real estate thing too. My understanding is even the profits can grow tax-free if you're just keeping all the thing because literally the SEP IRA owns the business. Like you don't actually own the business. You own the SEP IRA and that owns the business. It's something we looked into too, but it was going to get like annoying and complicated because it was only half of the business by me was owned. And ultimately, like I said, people listening, I am not a financial advisor. You should do what you want. And I don't mind diversifying. I don't want to touch that principle. I want that to continue to accrue and, fund it via debt instruments.
One thing and again, stealing this from BC over Metabolic, you can have a great operator, franchisee, in a great market, and then obviously skyrocket. Those are the people that's the top 20%. If we all agree with a 20, 60, 20 shit, 60% are doing pretty good, average to slightly above average, and then 20% are rocket ships, okay? Then you could have a shit operator in a great market, and they do well. They're in that 60%. Maybe even if they're really good, right? Like a really good market, it's kind of almost easy. But what you can't have, because if you have a dog shit operator in a good market, that can also tank it the other direction as well. Like I believe the common denominator, yes, it could be the market, and market selection is something with the sense in the past 19 months. So much of what I do on the gym real estate side is going ahead and looking, where do you open it? Because franchises are walking around blind, especially young ones like Alloy, right? Or Metabolic. They've never been in Nebraska. They don't know what the fuck Nebraska is. What does it look like? What are the cities that it's going to work in? Like when you're a franchise and you're expanding and someone's like, oh my God, I've always wanted to relocate to, Vancouver, Washington. And you're like, fuck, we've never set up anything in Vancouver. Okay. Now we have to go in there and we have to do our best job possible. Consumer segmentation data, market analysis, and hopefully we're going to find an opportunity for you to be as successful here as our location in Cincinnati, Ohio, and, Raleigh or whatever the hell else, whatever it may be. There's a lot that goes into the franchise thing on the market selection and the operator. Both have an equal amount of responsibility in the success of this thing. But I do believe a really good operator, even in a less than ideal market, can still do really well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, I've thought about this a lot too, just even in the independent gym space, it's not always obvious who's actually wearing pants, right? Because you can't really tell because it's always going to be the combination of the operator and the market. And yeah, and I agree broadly, a good operator is going to be able to at least do okay, even when there's a lot of headwinds. And a bad operator is probably more likely to be able to mess it up, but might still do really good if they just lucked into the right thing. So it's the 60%. It's really kind of hard to see what's going on, but you can basically guarantee if you're in the top 20%, you're both a good operator and you got lucky, right? Or you were smart about the location you chose. If you're in the bottom 20% in most situations, I wouldn't say you can never be a great operator and get in the bottom 20% of performance. Like maybe you got a horrible location, but in theory, usually those are going to be people that both don't know what they're doing and didn't have a great location. They might even have a good one, but they just did not have the skills to pay the bills.
Well, there's the operator, there's the market, there's the concept, and there's the timing. I think those are like the four key pieces there, right? Like, yeah, I'm thinking back. My first gym was lightning in a bottle, and it was just good place, good concept, right time, and it worked really, really well. Same thing with my second gym. If I did the exact same thing today, there's a 0% chance that I would have had the same result because the timing was wrong and then the concept's no longer like trending. I was reading some stuff about Plunge. I guess Plunge, the like actual cold plunge bathtub company, is 3 years old. So these guys were literally brick and mortar operators. Each had one location. One guy had a float studio. One guy had a sauna studio. Both in California. COVID shut down the business, and they're like, we'll sell bathtubs on the internet. And now this year they're going to do over 100 million in revenue, right? And I guarantee if those guys were starting a plunge company today, I don't think 3 years down the road they'd be able to do 100 million in revenue because the timing and concept's wrong. So let's assume that everybody listening to this is a genius. They're a brilliant operator because that's how they're going to assess themselves. Let's talk about concept selection because that I think is important because by the time you have your concept, you're kind of stuck. Two Brain, we deal with distressed franchises a lot. We get on calls with these people. A lot of times we just can't help them because there just isn't enough freedom in the model for us to save them. But like by the time you sign the deal for that concept, it's almost too late. So let's talk about how you would go about looking at evaluating concepts and choosing one. So Stu, you definitely had some opinions about this in your piece. Why don't you start?
Yeah, when I look for a concept, I'm always looking at the white space. And white space, you design nerds out there, we all know, go to Apple's homepage for any product. You'll see a lot of white space. It's just a design thing. And for me, essentially, we look at what are the prevailing winning models, and this would be methodology or concepts, if we want to call that, in the market, and look at two of them, any two, and then find the gap in between. And that white space is where there's an opportunity to do something a lot better. So like I would, and again, Mark, you correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm Alloy and I look at, are there personal training studios already in existence? Yes, there are. Are there, these health clubs and large scale global gyms that offer personal training? There certainly are. But nobody had done a good job of compacting and creating the highest level of operational capacity, which requires a low amount of HR, people to run it, and find these nice little 1,800 square foot suites in prime retail, high foot traffic, sites all over the country for someone to open up an Alloy. And so that was a white space opportunity. Rick plugs that in there, and then all the back end stuff that he's done with that, and we're good to go. Beyond that, we're not doing anything crazy. They didn't think of a new concept. It's personal training. It's really good, high quality training. It was that model found opportunities and vulnerabilities in what existed previously. So if your concept, like I laugh at Cycle Bar. When they popped up Cycle Bar, I remember thinking like Soul Cycle had already happened. Everyone was trying to chase Soul Cycle. Everyone. And before Soul Cycle, though, there was spinning. Johnny G invented, has the brand name Spinning. My ex-wife at the time, we opened up Ride or Die, a spin studio. I remember Johnny G sending us a cease and desist. Soul Cycle sent us a cease and desist because you can't use the term spin unless you're a spinning official studio. But think about it like this. Why did Soul Cycle, when indoor cycling was a thing, what made them pop? The white space was nobody had combined like Zen, dark room, candles, mantras, and the choreographed dancing. You've seen the little handlebar shit that they do on there where they go inside the side. Nobody had done that all in that type of a package. That was a white space opportunity. Now, Soul Cycle is not a franchise, obviously they're corporately owned, but that's what I look for in a concept. Where if I plot everything out, how much of the white space realty are they taking? And do I believe they've done it better, smarter, or less expensively than somebody else?
Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I
How did
don't
you
really
go
have a lot
about?
to.
So you said you did a consultant. Explain what that is.
Yeah,
a franchise consultant.
Yeah, so I was excited about the Alloy opportunity, but before I made that commitment, I really wanted to, first of all, just learn more about what I don't, learn what I don't know, what question I should be asking that I'm not asking, and really look at what opportunities were available. And we ultimately settled on looking at a few different brands. They weren't all fitness, because although part of my calculus, certainly for choosing Alloy, is like, okay, there's an advantage of me coming in with batteries included because I got plays. No matter what gets weird, like I got some plays here. I have a lot of stuff I don't have to think about, but I know how to do. But I was just curious to understand, okay, what are the different opportunities looking like and what are different models? And, for me, to add to what Stu said, what seemed to be I think, opportunity for Alloy. And again, this is going to be very interesting to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, which common topic of the show is this small group model, which I think compares very differently and favorably in a lot of ways compared to the large group class model. Because if you look at fitness franchises generally, and this is, by the way, almost all of Xponential's brands, you're looking at a very different product that's going to be, let's say, 20 to 50 people at a time. It's a class vibe. It's an experience. Your avatar is going to be a little bit younger. Your average monthly revenue is going to be, I don't know, like 110 to maybe $200, depending on what you're doing for most of those brands in most markets. And for me, Alloy is both interesting for me as an operator because I need less people that are paying more per month and are likely to be stickier. It was interesting to me as a human and a fitness person because I personally prefer a little bit more customization and personal training, understanding that as somebody that also runs classes, we do always have the challenge that the person just really wants to do, kettlebell stuff. And even while at MFF, we try to do self-limiting exercises. Look, you're 54 years old and I realize this is cheaper and you want to do it, but you have a double hip replacement. You should be doing the small group concept. I can easily accommodate that in there and give you modifications. And so I like the fitness product. I like the way it compares to the class-based concepts, because that's the other thing too, is the class-based concepts. I wouldn't say they're undifferentiated, but I think, in 2023, 2024, people know what that is. Right. It's not like 10 years ago. There's nothing new about that. And I'm not saying necessarily that small group is so thrilling to people because they're like, this is so new and exciting. But I do think it is a different kind of product. And there's not as much proliferation in the market of that model. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 3 to 5 years because, John, you can attest to this. Like, it seems all the smart money is going there right now, certainly in the independent gym space. That's not to say that people aren't holding strong or doing great with class-based. That can totally happen. But I think in the independent gym space, you're seeing a lot of people move there. A lot of the most successful operators are currently doing that. And Alloy, so far as I know, is the only small group fitness franchise. I'm wondering if either of you know, is there anyone else doing small group training like this? I mean, I know there's some one-on-one personal training brands, and there's obviously a lot of class-based, but I don't know of anybody doing strength training and 6-on-1.
On a franchise level?
Yeah.
I asked Rick when he was on the show, and he said no. And then I asked him, why has nobody done this before? And he didn't really give a great answer. And all of this is again, this is obviously a clear trend and a lot of people are pursuing this model. But it's TBD if it works on a grand scale or not.
All the money was going to large group. Rick just came in, like large groups had its apex. And then as it starts the down of the roller coaster, smart people start recognizing that apex. And I think what Rick did is he knows, okay, in the fitness industry is cyclical, people. Small group was a thing back in the day. Like you had even Curves you could call was a small group type model back then. And it's all cyclical. It kind of goes back and forth. That's why open gym models, health clubs. I mean, if you guys haven't paid attention to what Crunch is doing in Lifetime, I mean, they're killing it. Anyway, I think Rick just said, hey, it's not that it just goes out of vogue, but it's still there. And if everyone's been going to groups of 20 to 30 to 45 people packed in, Orange Theory and CrossFits, whatever, this now seems new again. It's brand spanking used, but it's new to me.
Yeah, I'm not aware of this type of small group training having been done really much before, because even into the 90s, it seemed most personal training, you had classes, jazzercise, the birth of the stuff, and Rick, I think, was a part of it. He was one of the first people, certainly in the country, doing it. In the aughts, you had the rise of the Thomas Plummerian semi-private gyms, which was also a slightly different model. It was like 3-on-1, maybe 4-on-1 individualized programming. So this particular, and again, the hive mind seems to be congealing around 6-on-1, working off of templates with some individual customization. I think that is not something I'm aware of has been done at large. And I think, to your question, John, this is a classic thing. It's like the shoe salesman in Africa who's like, this is an amazing opportunity. No one wears shoes. And then the other salesman's like, this is terrible. No one even wears shoes here. Right. So I think to some extent, there's certainly a chance it's an ideal whose time has come. I think in practice, one thing that has changed, and this is, I think, an important distinction, is the tech has now caught up that allow you to just a little bit more scaling and systemization of this in a way that you couldn't, because, 10 years ago, even, you wouldn't have had an iPad with a white label app like a Trainerize, whatever you want to use, that makes it easier to scale this type of strength training in a way that I think makes it easier for you to staff and train your coaches and provide a consistent experience for your members. So I think that is a meaningful contribution to this. And, the real talk, like, that's the challenge of this model. Right? Like, that's the hard part, because you do have to find it's easier than it's ever been. But to some extent, my sense, and people can probably disagree about this, I do still think it's harder to find somebody that you have the emotional intelligence to run the room, to really make 6 people feel really seen and feel like it's a personal training experience. You have enough technical chops that you're clearly building value because you can look at somebody doing a squat and you know what cue to say to them that both demonstrates your competency and makes them feel like a customer service perspective. Oh, you're looking at me and you really know what you're doing. That person, I think, is a little harder to find than an F45 Orange Theory. And by the way, I'm not saying those people are not massively talented. That's a huge talent. But by and large, I think it's easier to find somebody that frankly just doesn't need that much of a technical requirement because you're just like throwing the party. You're telling, all right, everybody go harder. Great job, Jimmy. High five, high five. Again, there's a lot to be said for that model. I'm not knocking it at all. But I don't think that style of coach is as hard to find as the one that an Alloy needs to find. But my final thing I'll say, which is a credit to them, is they've built the model enough that there's enough fat on the bone that the owner can be pretty profitable while actually paying those people with like a good gig. I mean, you can pay out your trainers pretty well at Alloy. And I think that's also the masterstroke, that they have just taken the leanness so far that there's enough fat on the bone for the owner to make good money. And it's only probably 2 people are going to do good money. But you can find some good people in a lot of markets because the prices you can quote when you're doing your job postings are enough that it's very competitive. You get some really, really talented people in there that are pumped about doing this job.
Yeah, I'm going to echo everything Mark just said. And to go back to that, where I saw the small semi-private, it was always in sports performance, D1, Velocity, Cressy, because you have the baseball coach guy and he'd be working with 6 pitchers, 5 pitchers at once.
Sure.
And I mean, I remember the first time it ever hit me in the private sector, it was just, a one-off independent gym. It's like when I was in the strength and conditioning circuit, Division 2 and 3 school, we'd have large groups come in and everyone went off in their specialty small group kind of scenario. It was like, that works so well based on that. Why could you? And I think that's where it just came to. Like even personal training at Gold's Gym is like the most popular trainer gets booked up. They would literally write it. It's not even in the policy. It's just like, all right, you're taking 3 people now in that hour because you're sold out and I have to keep selling these sessions. But yeah, I think Rick is going to go down, seeing what you guys have done so far. I was pulling up a map here on the locations. I think that 6-on-1, I think he's going to write the Bible on that.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing too about Rick is an Alloy in general, again, to their credit, they had licensed like 2,000 locations and they also had the opportunity to do some of everything. So Alloy as a licensee, and they're still, they're no longer selling new ones. They're still servicing. I think a lot of gyms are still running a licensed Alloy model. And yes, they offered what they got around to as the core thing they wanted to offer, but they also offered a lot of like metabolic classes and a lot of other stuff as part of that. And by Rick's telling, they essentially were just looking at the numbers about what was retention like, what was sticky. And they decided, I think correctly analyzing the market, to go all in on the one service that they felt was the stickiest, most profitable. And again, similar to me, like Rick has a similar, I think, strength and conditioning, perform better, strengthcoach.com background of nerdery, where we're like, well, we kind of like this better. Like personal training doesn't scale very good, but the classes, I don't know, your knees make me scared in classes. Not to say the classes can't be done well. I feel like I'm knocking on classes. I run classes, okay, listener. I'm not knocking on classes, but I like small group better.
So 2 quick things that I think are worth pointing out when you're in the concept selection phase. Thing number 1 that was always kind of the red flag for me with Xponential is it's really hard to find one good concept and run with that. The idea that they had 11 concepts and were just buying concepts and tucking them into the system kind of sent off the spidey sense saying like, they're probably not spending a ton of time optimizing these. If I have to go in there and figure out how to make a Rumble make 5% more revenue, or I can just go buy another franchise concept and sell 100 more of those. If you're a franchisor and you're getting paid 7% of the top line, the second's going to be a lot more of an enticing proposal, especially if you're publicly traded and your valuation is very determined by how quickly you're growing.
That I think also is related to that specific cautionary tale, which I think is an important one. If you look at the brands, there are some brands they've had for, in some cases, years, like AKT. And I don't know Anna well. I actually know Anna a little bit because she also was a musical theater actor, and we were like musical theater actors in New York at the same time. I think they don't even have 30 locations. They've been around for a long time. And that article spoke to, there seemed to be some sort of like maybe legal beef going on between her and Xponential, but you're right. Not only do they have all those brands, but a lot of the brands don't seem to be growing. And you have to remember, from the franchisor's perspective, the only thing that actually matters to them is system-wide revenue. That's it, because that's how they make their royalties. And of course, growth, right? The profitability of the franchisees doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them. If they're a good person, they'll care some, but that's not paying their bills. They only get paid on revenue. So if you're just being Machiavellian about it, are incentivized, you get as many people out there like barely breaking even. It just doesn't matter. The more stores, the more total revenue, the more money the franchisor makes.
Yeah, when I see that, it's kind of like the guy who has like serial entrepreneur in their bio, and I just like determine that to mean like you have 10 businesses that don't make a lot of money.
I exited my business when I sold it for,
multiple 5-figure exit.
I sold it for $5,000 for my equipment.
And so here's my second pro tip for people who are hunting around. So there's a website called Business Buy Sell, bizbuysell.com, where you can go look at things for sale. And I'll just do a nationwide search for fitness franchises. And so if you see like a recurring trend within the fitness franchises for sale,
9 rounds.
If you see a lot, yeah, exactly. So boxing concept, looks like a boxing concept. Like if you see a lot of those for sale, probably a red flag that like these aren't doing well anywhere. Where on the flip side, like if you tried to go in here and buy a Planet Fitness, you're not going to find one.
Right.
If you tried to go and buy a Domino's pizza, like you're not getting one on Biz Buy Sell, because those are good concepts. Those are going to get gobbled up. These are never going to make it to a website like this. So always take a peek around here, and I guarantee you will find you'll find some Xponential franchises in the mix here. But always take a look.
This is how we end up finding real estate. A lot. I swear to, I use this site probably as much as I use CoStar and Crexy and everything else for finding real estate in markets that I need to go off market strategy with.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So what will you do? What's the play here?
Well, you go into something like this. And so let's say, like, for example, that Anytime Fitness, let's say that's the perfect site, size, everything my client wants. We go in there, they're looking to sell. Well, typically, most of those guys, like I saw the one, it was like for $275,000, a brand that comes with 100 locations. Like, you just look at this, you're like, if you could get out of it, you would. If you're on Biz Buy Sell, you are now at the you're desperate. No one is on Biz Buy Sell that has a very, very sellable thing. If they had a very sellable thing, you wouldn't be on Biz Buy Sell.
Particularly with an established brand, because you can usually sell within the system.
Yeah, 100, exactly, 1,000%.
Like waiting to buy, I want to consolidate. I got my empire going.
People who want into a market and they can't because you have the market territory rights, whatever it is. So like generally something went wrong. You, the market, the model, the concept, the timing, whatever. So you go in and you make an offer, being, hey, listen, but maybe I don't even want your equipment, right? I want to assume your lease, aka sign a new lease on this location. You have a personal guarantee on it. You're trying to get the fuck out. There's a lot of opportunities there. Now, if you can transact on the equipment, awesome, great, because that's all they really have. But most of those ones, like the Anytime Fitness, I guarantee those are all on a lease structure, a financing model anyway. They don't actually own the equipment outright for the most part.
Probably, yeah. And they also all say Anytime Fitness. And they're all purple.
So I'll ask you to this on sites like this, and I've been approached multiple times from franchise concepts back when I was operating. I'm sure Mark gets these emails too, basically saying like, hey, we got this franchisee. They're close to break even. They can't hack it. It's losing a little bit of money. They basically want someone to take the keys. So essentially, they'll give you studios for free. You don't have to pay the franchise fee. You don't have to pay. They already paid $400,000 to build it out. They already got some momentum, but it's just losing a little bit of money. And there are opportunities like this that come across. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of these available. Now, this always sounded very tempting, and it was never something I pulled the trigger on. I wanted to ask both you guys, because you do a lot of networking and talking around the industry. Do you know of anybody who has successfully pulled off this strategy? So taking almost cash flow generative franchisees, acquiring them for pennies, and then turning them into an empire. Is this a viable strategy, or is it just kind of business porn?
Evan Lindsay. Evan Lindsay's out of Canada. Original CrossFit gym owner. He's taken 3 metabolics and that were underperforming And like in a tourist market like Asheville, North Carolina, if you've been to Asheville, if you really like granola and weed and you're pretty woke and you enjoy all that kind of shit and not taking baths on a regular basis, Asheville, North Carolina is a great place for you. Great beer selection, not a great place for fitness. Downtown area is fucking ridiculous from a site selection standpoint. He's flipped that entire place phenomenal. So he did Asheville, Greenville, and now he's part owner in Jupiter. And he does all this from the Cayman Islands. He lives in the Caymans. He comes into town 3-4 times a year, and that's what he's done with that franchise system. Now he's still in consulting. He's an incredibly smart dude in and of his own right, but he would be the one guy I would think of as an individual guy who's been managed to be able to go in because it's a personnel issue. If the concept's right, the market's right, and the timing, assuming, is still good, you have to be the person to go in there, gut the personnel. But unfortunately, that personnel is sometimes the franchisee that needs to go.
What about you, Mark?
I don't know of anyone. I almost wonder if like that scenario is almost maybe an exception that proves the rule to some extent, because like that was a very unique scenario. We had a very talented operator. You had a very good concept, a very good brand, and correctly the smart operator saw like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of meat on this bone. I can jump in there. I think more often than not in practice, to your point, John, I think when you have like a desperation franchise sell, it's not usually that this location is good, this concept is awesome. It's just really this operator really, really, really doesn't know what they're doing. Because like we said earlier, usually that type of situation, they wind up in the 60%, right? Usually if they're in the 20% where they're doing a fire sale, not always, but I would assume, unless you're really proven otherwise, that is like not only not a great operator, but also like not a great market. And then, furthermore, maybe not a great concept or great timing if we play with that 4-piece framework.
So, gents, I know we're getting close to bumping up against our timeline here. Mr. Fisher schedules himself very tightly until January 1st, where he will be available to play. What'd you get, a Wii? Oh, no, a Switch.
A Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch. I'm exploring.
All right, so he'll be available
hobbies.
for Mario Kart tournaments in January. But in the meantime, where do people go to find you? Stu, you go first.
You can just Google WTF Gym Talk or the Gym Real Estate Company, and my ugly mug will pop up.
And then, Mark, what is your handle on the Switch for people who want to clan up?
Yes. Well, I don't have a Switch yet, but if you want to find me on the Instagram, best place there is at Business for Unicorns. You can go to businessforunicorns.com, or you can go to my personal Instagram and watch stories where I repost videos of my baby.
Wonderful. Gents, this has been awesome. Always enjoyed chopping it up with each of you individually. First time together. I think people are going to get a lot out of this. Appreciate the time as always.
It felt like a spiritual, psychological fitness gangbang today. That's what it was. It was a gangbang.
Like, subscribe, do all the things, and we will catch you next week on Gym World Worldwide.